News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.
Well, I suppose everyone's heard the significant news by now. Pope Francis passed away earlier today, Easter Monday, April 21st.
Yes, at his residence in Casa Santa Marta.
Yeah.
He was 88.
And the timing happening on Easter Monday. I mean, right after the biggest celebration in the Christian calendar.
It really does add a layer of profound symbolism, doesn't it? Easter, all about resurrection, new beginnings.
And now, the end of this very notable papacy, it makes you think about transition, legacy.
Exactly. Themes that are very present right now.
We got the official word this morning, didn't we? Around 9:45 a.m.
That's right. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Camerlengo, made the announcement from Casa Santa Marta.
His role is crucial now, sort of overseeing things in this interim period.
Absolutely. And his statement, I thought, really hit the mark.
Yeah, he said, let me find the quote. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and of his church. He taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially in favor of the poorest and most marginalized.
That really does capture Pope Francis, that constant focus, service, the gospel, the poor.
It defined his time as Pope, absolutely.
Those were his key priorities, no question.
And things are already moving procedurally. Matteo Bruni from the Holy See Press Office.
Right, the director.
He's indicated that Pope Francis's remains, they're expected to be moved to St. Peter's Basilica on Wednesday.
Wednesday, April 23rd, for public veneration.
Which will be, well, a huge moment for people wanting to pay their respects.
It's a very established tradition, this period of public viewing. A chance for the faithful worldwide, really, to connect, offer prayers.
It makes it very visible, the connection people felt.
It does, a manifestation of that global community's bond with him.
And there was also that ceremony last night, Monday evening, the formal certification of death.
Yes, that's a key part of the protocol. The declaration was read, Cardinal Farrell confirmed it.
And then the Pope's body was placed in the coffin right away?
Immediately, yes.
Yeah.
And following that, the seals were placed on the papal apartments in the Apostolic Palace and also Casa Santa Marta.
Seals. So, like, locking them up officially.
Exactly. It's partly tradition, partly security. It marks the formal end of the pontificate, the start of the interregnum, the time between popes, and secures his private spaces and papers.
Got it. It sounds very formal, very symbolic.
It is, steeped in history.
So, looking ahead, the first General Congregation of Cardinals is set for Tuesday morning, tomorrow morning.
Right. That's the next major step.
And deciding the funeral date is likely top of the agenda.
Very likely, yes. They need to finalize those arrangements. But it's also the start of the behind-the-scenes preparations for the conclave itself.
Right, the election of the next pope. Before we get to that, it's probably worth remembering Pope Francis's recent health struggles.
Definitely. That hospitalization back in February, it was quite serious.
Bronchitis, which then turned into bilateral pneumonia.
And he was in the hospital for 38 days. That's a long time.
It really is. He only returned to Casa Santa Marta relatively recently to continue recovering. So his health was clearly, fragile.
It had become much more prominent, his health issues, in these later years. That bout earlier this year really underscored his age, didn't it?
And it wasn't entirely new, these respiratory problems, back in his 20s, I read.
Yes, in Argentina. He had part of a lung removed after a severe respiratory infection.
So a lifelong issue, really. It cropped up again, remember, in November 2023. He had to cancel that trip to the UAE.
That's right. Influenza and lung inflammation were cited then.
It really paints a picture of someone pushing through, keeping up a demanding schedule despite these ongoing health concerns.
Absolutely. It highlights his resilience, I think, fulfilling his duties despite those physical limits.
Interestingly, he seemed to have prepared for this moment himself just last year, April 2024.
Ah, yes, the updated liturgical book for papal funerals.
Exactly. He approved changes, like the formal ascertainment of death happening in the chapel, not the private room.
And the immediate placement in the coffin, which you mentioned earlier.
Right. And the reasoning behind it, according to Archbishop Diego Ravelli,
the master of pontifical liturgical celebrations,
was that Pope Francis wanted simpler rites, focused more on the risen Christ.
Less on the Pope as a sort of worldly figure, more as a pastor and disciple.
That really speaks volumes about his perspective, doesn't it? His whole approach to the papacy.
It absolutely does. It aligns perfectly with his Vision service, humility, not worldly pomp.
So with his passing, the world's attention now shifts. We're entering the Novendia.
Yes, the traditional 9-day mourning period.
Yeah.
A time for prayer, reflection across the church.
And then following that, the Conclave to elect his successor.
It's a unique process, isn't it? Deeply significant, historically and spiritually. The Novendia sets the stage, a period of grieving, but also spiritual preparation for the cardinals.
Preparing for that huge responsibility of choosing the next pope.
Precisely. It sets the spiritual tone.
And the conclave itself, famously secret, locked in the Sistine Chapel.
Under lock and key, yes. The College of Cardinals gathers.
And the current rolls, as of January this year, how many electors are there?
There are 138 electors. Those cardinals under the age of 80.
Out of a total of 252 cardinals. So a specific group holds the vote.
Right. That age limit, under 80, reflects the desire for electors likely to lead the church effectively in the coming years. The composition of that group is always closely watched.
And the voting itself, how does that work again?
Up to 4 rounds, or ballots, per day. And crucially, a 2/3 majority is needed.
2/3. That can take time.
It certainly can. Conclaves vary hugely in length. Some, like for Pius XII in 1939, were incredibly quick, just 1 day.
1 day.
But others historically have dragged on for years, though that's much rarer now.
More recently, Francis and Benedict.
Relatively quick. Both elected in just 2 days. Francis took 5 ballots, Benedict 4.
So it suggests maybe some level of consensus, at least relatively speaking.
It can suggest that yes. Or at least that a consensus formed fairly quickly among the electors in those specific cases. It's always a complex dynamic.
Okay, so the stage is set. The big question now is, who? Who are the potential contenders? The papabili, as they say.
Right. And several names consistently come up in discussions. We should probably touch on a few key figures.
Let's start, perhaps, with Cardinal Peter Erdo from Hungary.
Yes, Archbishop of Budapest, Primate of Hungary. Very experienced figure.
He's headed the Council of European Episcopal Conferences twice, I believe.
He has. Which gives him, naturally, strong connections within that very important European bloc of cardinals. They carry significant weight.
And that role also likely gave him exposure to African cardinals, too.
Undoubtedly. His network is extensive.
Yeah.
He's generally seen as representing a more, perhaps, traditional European perspective, focused on consolidating doctrine.
Okay. Then there's Cardinal Reinhard Marx, German.
Former president of the German Bishops' Conference, yes. A very different profile in some ways.
He's been a big proponent of the synodal path in Germany.
Very much so. That dialogue process born out of the abuse crisis there has been, well, controversial is probably the word.
Definitely. Concerns raised, particularly from conservatives, about church unity on issues like celibacy, homosexuality, women's ordination.
All thorny issues. And it's created skepticism. Remember, he actually offered his resignation over the handling of the abuse crisis.
Oh, that's right. But Pope Francis didn't accept it.
No, he didn't.
Yeah.
Which itself says something perhaps about wanting to keep that dialogue open, however difficult. But Marx certainly signals a potential focus on internal reform, which would be met with both support and resistance.
Interesting dynamic. How about Cardinal Marc Ole, Canadian?
Yes, Cardinal A. He headed the Vatican's Congregation for Bishops for over a decade. A very influential post.
That's the office that vets bishop appointments worldwide.
Exactly. Huge influence. He was appointed by Benedict XVI, but stayed on under Francis until 2023.
So generally seen as more conservative theologically than Francis?
That's fair to say. But he still oversaw bishop appointments during Francis's pontificate. And many saw him appointing men who were pastorally minded, in line with Francis's emphasis.
So maybe a focus on orthodoxy, but with that pastoral element.
Potentially, yes. His experience in that role is immense.
Okay, then a really prominent name, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Italian.
Pope Francis's Secretary of State since 2014. Definitely a leading contender, given that role.
It's such a visible, powerful position. He's been involved in some high-profile things.
Indeed. The deal with China on bishop nominations, for instance.
Which was quite debated, and the Vatican's London property investment issue, though he wasn't personally charged with anything there.
Right. He also has Latin American experience from his time as nuncio to Venezuela.
So the thinking is he might continue Francis's general direction, but maybe differently.
Perhaps with a more diplomatic style. Less overtly reformist, maybe. And of course, his election would mean an Italian returns to the papacy.
Which hasn't happened since John Paul II. Parolin seems like someone who could offer continuity, but maybe with a more traditional Vatican approach.
That's how many observers see him. Experienced, diplomatic, well-regarded.
What about an American pope? Cardinal Robert Prevost comes up?
Yes, Chicago-born, but with vast experience in Peru. Missionary, then archbishop.
And now he heads the dicastery for bishops, the same office Ulay used to run.
Exactly, a very influential role right now. The idea of an American pope is always discussed, sometimes seen as unlikely due to U.S. global influence.
Right, the superpower pope concern.
But Prevost has deep roots outside the U.S., in Latin America. And Francis clearly rated him, sending him to Chiclayo back in 2014. His current job vetting bishops definitely puts him on the map.
A potential focus on global outreach, pastoral leadership.
That seems consistent with his background and current role, yes.
Then there's Cardinal Robert Serra from Guinea.
A very different figure again.
Yeah.
Retired head of the Vatican's liturgy office. Very popular with conservatives.
Seen as potentially bringing back a more doctrinaire style, like John Paul II or Benedict.
That's certainly the expectation among his supporters. He previously headed the Vatican's charity office, Cor Unum, but is better known for his time at Divine Worship.
And he had some public disagreements with Pope Francis.
Yes, most notably over that book on priestly celibacy he co-authored, presented as being with Pope Emeritus Benedict. It came out right when Francis was considering exceptions for the Amazon.
Right. That caused quite a stir. So Serra would represent a clear shift towards tradition.
Unquestionably. A focus on liturgy, conservative theology.
Okay, how about Cardinal Christoph Schönborn, Austrian?
Archbishop of Vienna, an interesting case. He was a student of Pope Benedict.
Which suggests conservative leanings.
Academically, perhaps. But he's also known for defending Pope Francis's outreach to divorced and remarried Catholics in Amoris Laetitia. Called it an organic development of doctrine.
Which caused controversy itself.
Yeah.
And didn't his own parents' divorce give him a personal angle on that?
He has spoken about that, yes. He's also been quite critical of how the Vatican handled sexual abuse cases in the past.
So he appeals potentially across some divides. Conservative grounding, but pastoral openness.
He represents a complex blend. He could potentially bridge tradition and pastoral outreach with a focus on accountability.
Finally, Cardinal Luis Tagle from the Philippines.
Often seen as a potential successor, favored by Francis himself, and potentially the first Asian pope.
That would be historic. He heads the dicastery for evangelization now.
Yes, the dicastery for evangelization. An office given much greater prominence in Francis's reform of the Curia, reflecting that missionary focus.
And he often talks about his background, Filipino with Chinese roots.
Yes, he connects very personally and emotionally to his heritage. He's seen as embodying that focus on global outreach evangelization, particularly towards Asia.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The passing of Pope Francis on Easter Monday, the immediate plans, the funeral arrangements coming up.
And the beginning of this whole process to choose his successor. It's a major moment of transition.
A moment steeped in tradition, but facing a very modern global church.
Absolutely. The end of one chapter, the anticipation of the next.
And looking at just those few cardinals we discussed, Erdo, Marx, Ulay, Perlin, Prevost, Serra, Schönborn, Tagle.
Just a selection, of course.
Right. But even that selection shows such incredible diversity. Backgrounds, experiences, theology, geography.
It really underscores the sheer breadth of the Catholic Church today. The College of Cardinals reflects that global reality.
It does. So many different perspectives and priorities represented. The choice they make will be fascinating.
Indeed. It will inevitably involve weighing those diverse voices and the needs of the Church worldwide.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about the complexities here. Each potential pope could steer things in a slightly different direction. What parts of Pope Francis's legacy, and it's a significant legacy, will truly endure? How might they be reinterpreted, maybe even reshaped by the next leader?
Those are the big questions now.
It's a truly historic moment to watch unfold. Lots to reflect on.
News Talk on Samar News, your go-to podcast for the latest headlines and in-depth discussions. Join us as we unravel the stories that matter most, bringing you insightful commentary and expert analysis. Tune in for thought-provoking conversations that spark dialogue and inspire action. Stay connected with the news that shapes our world, only on News Talk on Samar News.